On this action timeline, we're going to be talking about the Mummy series. Which Mummy series, you might be asking? There's so many. There's the Universal series. There's the Hammer series. There's dozens of Mummy series. So we're going to be talking about the most recent Brendan Fraser version of this series, including the Scorpion King spin-off movies, which I thought there was like 2 or 3 at most, but there's a lot of those. So let's get cracking and unwrap this timeline. Get it? The wild adventure starts in 1999 with The Mummy, directed by the man who brought you Deep Rising. I will find a way to talk about that movie at some point. It starts in ancient Egypt in 1290 BC, and we meet Imhotep and his lover Ankh-Sunamun. And she's already married, so there's treachery and suicide, and Imhotep is mummified. We bounce ahead to 1923 and meet George of the Jungle, and then jump 3 more years to 1926 and meet Rachel Weisz. It's been a while since we've seen Rick last, and he's Shaggy now, and they head off to the lost city of Hamunaptra, along with traitorous Benny. They find it, and we first meet the flesh-burrowing scarab beetles, and they find the Book of the Dead, and say, Kanda, Alamimna, Kadim! Okay, no, wrong Book of the Dead. They start reading from it, even though they're warned not to, and it wakes up Imhotep, who starts reforming, looking a lot less like the bandaged mummies of old, but is afraid of cats. He has a stretchy fly mouth and eventually looks like a replacement Darkman, and our heroes team up with Carlos Oliveira to take him down. Pretty soon he's fully intact and kidnaps Evie, and there's some big chases, and we head back to Hamunaptra and face off with more mummies. And Ankh-Sunamun is partially revived, but killed again by more mummies. A spell makes Imhotep mortal, and a sword makes him stabbed. And he melts away in the high point of pre-2000 digital attempts. Benny gets bugged, while Rick, Evie, and Jonathan and Ardeth escape with treasure in tow. A mere 2 years later, we saw 2001's The Mummy Returns, which kicks off in 3067 BC, close to 2,000 years before the beginning of the first one, and we meet the Scorpion King, who looks like Maui. But is seriously about, like half the size that he is now. And he makes a deal with Anubis and is taken away. We then jump to 1933, so we're 7 years after the first one, and Rick's back, and he and Evie have a kid named Alex. And just like the first one, they disturb an ancient artifact which awakens evil. This is the second film in a row that the entire film is because Rick and Evie mess with things that they're not supposed to. Meanwhile, Anux's reincarnated self is up to no good, and the bugs are back, and Alex opens an amulet that shows him the Scorpion King's oasis, and Jonathan's back, as is Ardeth, and Evelyn gets kidnapped. Again. They revive Imhotep, and he reforms rapidly, and Alex says that he's only 8 years old, which is a problem. For him to be 8, he would have to be born in 1925, which is 1 year before the events of the first film. If we assume that the first one took place early in 26, and Rick and Evie got down to baby making super quickly, it's possible that he could have been born at the end of that year, and if this one takes place late in the year, which doesn't seem too likely from everyone's clothing in London, but we'll go with it, he could have just turned 7, but no way is he 8. Ultimately, we just have to assume that, like a lot of kids, Alex likes to think of himself as older than he is and just shouted 8 in the heat of the moment, I guess. Imho's plan is to find and kill the Scorpion King, gaining control of his army in order to take over the world. And there's some weird revelations about Rick being born a Magi and Evie being the reincarnation of Nefertiti, because look how Egyptian that she looks. They make it to the Lost Oasis and Evie is stabbed. Emmy becomes mortal again, and then the king awakens and, yeah. Okay. This looks kinda like The Rock, I guess. I mean, good try? Evie is resurrected, and Rick follows the handy-dandy wall directions on how to kill the big guy and stabs him, destroying Anubis' army while Baldy falls to his death. Sunamoon gets bugged, and our heroes sail into the sunset. A mere 1 year later saw 2002's The Scorpion King, a spin-off of Mr. Johnson's character. He looks about the same age as the beginning of The Mummy Returns, and he's still human, so we're around the same time frame, but maybe like several years before 3067 BC or so, like 3073 or something, and the late great original Kingpin of Crime shows up. Matthias and his crew are hired to kill an enemy's sorcerer, although when he meets her, he fails to land a Lady Deathstrike and is double-crossed, and makes new friends, including a kid sidekick. And it's pretty hard to reconcile this guy here and the character that we last saw, as the Scorpion King was a vicious tyrant and Matthias is just kinda the Rock. He rescues the sorceress and Rock and Bear fight, but then team up in a final battle with Memnon, killing most of the main villains, but Matthias is shot. It doesn't stick though, and Memnon is taken out, so Matthew becomes the new king, and is referred to as the Scorpion King for the first time. And I gotta tell you, this doesn't really have the feel of a mummy film at all. It might as well have just been a completely different character. Everything went quiet until 2008 when we got a double whammy. First up, we got The Mummy: Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, which is a change of pace for the series, as Stephen Sommers did not return to the director's chair and Rob Cohen stepped in. Imhotep was officially dead, and we're in ancient Egypt. We meet the Dragon Emperor of the title, who builds the Great Wall, masters elemental powers, and is cursed by Michelle Yeoh, and both him and his army turn to clay. We then flash forward, and Rick's back, and Evie's now an author, but she's looking a little more Bella-like. They say Alex is in college, so we're more than 10 years after the last one, and if he's in college, he should be at least 18, so it's at least 1944, and he finds the Clay army. Evie says that they made a promise to quit espionage after the war, so it's definitely post-45, and Jonathan has a club called Imhotep's, and they finally tell us that it's Chinese New Year 1947, so we're set in early 47 here, and there's betrayal, which leads to the Emperor's revival. They head to Shangri-La to stop him, and a bunch of Yeti show up to help, which... okay? It's Rick's turn to almost die, and Z is still alive, and restores him, but Han becomes a dragon, and the Clay Boys are back, and they have to fight the souls of all the people Han killed. Z sacrifices herself, and in final battle, they manage to stab Han with the magic knife, which makes him explode. Everybody ties up happy, and the O'Connell family saga ended. At pretty much the same time, in direct-to-video land, we got the Scorpion King 2 Rise of a Warrior, which tells of Matthias' father, Asher, and Sargon here is Randy Couture. And I know that my wrestling fans in the audience will make fun of me for only knowing him from the Expendables. Sargon kills Asher in his wig. Matthias trains, and 6 years pass, so I guess he's about 18 or so here. And if we assume that he's in his late 20s or early 30s or so in the first one, that would make this between 3083 and 3090 BC or so. They talk about the Spear of Osiris, which we saw in The Mummy Returns, and Matthias fights a Minotaur, or the Minotaur, I guess, and kills it. They head into the underworld and face giant monsters and the goddess Astarte, who has some handy CGI cover-ups, and retrieve the Sword of Damocles. He heads to a showdown with Sargon, who turns into a giant scorpion that is mostly invisible because this movie didn't have Brendan Fraser money, but is ultimately stabbed to death. Matthias survives and heads off for more adventures alone with the title of Scorpion King in his future. The franchise was dormant for 4 years until 2012 finally gave us Scorpion King 3 Battle for Redemption, which introduces us to yet another new look for Matthias, and we learn that the sorceress has died. and were set after the first film. Although some time has passed, but we're likely still around that 3070 BC mark. The king's lost everything, and he's hired by the King of Anarchy to protect the Book of the Dead from the Mummy films. Hellboy's brother usually says slam evil, but here he is evil, and his men kill an elephant, which was enough to make me hate him forever. And Matthias helps Jango Fett, and then also ends up helping the Zane to rescue the princess, who is apparently kidnapped herself, I guess. She said that she heard about his exploits when she was a girl from her father, which would insinuate that this is actually further away from the last one than we previously thought. Maybe 10 years or so? So let's restructure, since the only date that we clear on is 3067 BC for Mummy Returns. And this one has to be a while before that, so it would be like 3070 BC or so, with part 1 10 years earlier, like 3080 BC. With part 2 hitting around 10 years before that in 3090 BC, although I have a feeling that may be tweaked again with the next movie. Talos gets the book and uses it to raise Kimbo Slice and frickin' Drax. And they fight with Slice getting torched. But then there's a big final showdown with everyone involved, and Talos is taken down while Matthias uses the Book of the Dead to save the day. But Remeson dies, and our boy takes on the mantle of Scorpion King once more, and man, oh man, are we getting pretty far from where we started. I'm kind of refusing to believe that this is the same character that we meet in A Mummy Returns. 3 years later, we saw 2015's Scorpion King 4, Quest for Power, which returned Victor Webster to the role, and then the Hulk shows up. And they talk about how the Scorpion King is just a legend. And it's kind of implied here that due to his encounter with Astarte in the second one that he's immortal. So my timeline, I guess, doesn't really mean anything. So for the time being, let's just say that this one is quite a while after the last one, and I'll sum it up later. Matthias is hired by a hobo with a shotgun and opposed by Corporal Hicks. Reese is betrayed by his own son, and Not Rock has to team up with Valina to escape. Valina's dad is Brad Majors, and they have some adventures, including the guy who hates cans, and wrestling, because that appears to be the target audience for these films now. Matthias says that he was on the run from another warlord years ago, referring to the second film, although he doesn't make it seem like too terribly long ago. And Valina's dad said that he's from across the sands, which could account for his status of legend instead of a time frame, and this one could possibly be not too long after the last one. There's a dragon, which turns out to be fake, because there's a subplot in which everything magical turns out to be man-made, which is odd because the previous films established that magic exists in this world quite a bit. Bostwick gets stabbed, so Matthias has to reenact the ending of Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail, and then kills Drazen and restores Barry, proving magic exists, which we already knew because we watched like 6 other movies where magic was real. Valina becomes queen, and Matthias stays with her to serve. Another 3 years go by, and just last year we got 2018's Scorpion King Book of Souls, which opens with telling us about a sword of Anubis that when used captures people's souls in a book, hence the title. We meet the Sarge from Jason X, who gets the sword, and we meet a different looking Matthias, who over the course of a few movies has totally changed races, which is one hell of an accomplishment. He's following the pattern of ending every movie in a noble position with a love interest, only to start the next one alone and destitute, without it ever really being explained why. He's almost killed, but is revived by scorpion magic, thanks to Tala, daughter of Balthazar from the first film, who's dead now, and she's in her late 20s or early 30s and didn't seem to exist in the first film, so it's likely that this one is at least that amount of time after that. There's a magic portal to go along with the magic book, so the last entry's science versus magic subtext is completely gone. After a series of, frankly, very repetitive fights, it turns out that the Book of Souls is actually this young lady. He's captured, but scorpions give him strength. And there's a big final battle in which Discount Thing takes out the Sword of Anubis, and Sword of Matthias kills Nebsarek, and the Book of Souls gets snapped by Thanos. So let's break this down. If this one takes place shortly before the events of the beginning of The Mummy Returns, this can be around 3067 BC as well. And if we peg Tala down to being around 25, that would place the first film at around 3092 or so. So the second film would have to be about 10 years early before that, so 3102 BC, with the third and fourth taking place between 3092 BC and 67 BC. So let's place part 3 at 3082 and part 4 at 3072 BC. Although the franchise is wrapped up for now, the Book of the Dead did make a quick cameo in 2017's The Mummy, the failed kickoff of the Dark Universe series. It's not connected in any other ways, and maybe I'll cover it in an episode of Failure to Launch sometime. So this one gets a little bit confusing, so I think it's best if we recap how to watch these films if you do want to watch them in proper chronological order. The first film you would start off with would be the second Scorpion King movie, Rise of a Warrior. Then you would jump to the first Scorpion King movie, then bounce back to Scorpion King 3, 4, and 5. After that, you would jump all the way to The Mummy, following up with The Mummy Returns, and finally wrapping up with The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. So there you have it. It's 8 movies that with increasingly less continuity. The Mummy series actually had really nice continuity. It worked out really well with the exception of the kid being 8 or 7. Everything else was pretty solid. The dates made sense. The Scorpion King series is a lot more anthology-ish. It does bounce around quite a bit. I mean, the Scorpion King is like an Irish guy in the last one, so go figure there. But all in all, these are mostly pretty enjoyable movies. I enjoyed all of the Mummy movies. The third one's a little boring at times. It's not as good as the first two. And the Scorpion King movies are, for the most part, they're okay. I mean, they're worth a watch. They're not terrible, but they're not really that great either. I had fun. They're worth a watch. I'd check it out if this kind of thing interests you. But that's about it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the Mummy movies. Let me know what you thought down below. Let me know what other movies you want me to cover, or what other action series you want me to cover, or if you think this wasn't an action movie, if you're like, this is the wrong category, whatever, just let me know. Until then, also check out my patrons over here. These guys are supporting the channel. You can too. I hope you do. It'd be nice if you do, but thank you to these guys for doing otherwise, and then thank you for watching this video and taking the time. And I'll see you in another couple weeks for another great video. Thanks. Bye, guys.